Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm Will Robinson-Smith. I'll be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at KSC. For those who are with us for this morning's Starlink coverage, welcome back. If this is your first launch with us today, welcome in. If you were not with us this morning, we are unfortunately facing another Vandenberg-like launch environment here today, with the Space Coast very much socked in with some pretty dense fog that's making it nigh impossible to see the Falcon 9 rocket, which you do know is standing tall at Launch Complex 39A. SpaceX is currently counting down towards a liftoff. T-minus 54 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. Targeting the launch of its Falcon 9 rocket at 6:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 23:13 UTC for those joining around the world. As we're getting things rolling this afternoon, I want to thank our team that's supporting this launch coverage today. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast. Our launch photography team of Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane, out and about getting ready to hopefully see the rocket well enough to do some still photography. Adam going to do his level best to track the rocket once it does leave the pad, as he did this morning as well. We're also joined by our friends Pete Carstens with MaxQ Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, spread across the Space Coast to try to get the best possible views of the Falcon 9 as it makes its ascent as well as its return to a land landing. SpaceX targeting a touchdown over at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. If successful, it will be the 48th booster landing at LZ-1, the 59th here in the Sunshine State, SpaceX's 405th overall booster landing successfully to date, if all goes well. Just to let you know that the day wasn't always fogged over like this. There was a brief pocket of sunshine here in Brevard County in which SpaceX was able to capture this image of its Falcon 9 rocket standing at pad 39A. On board 2 WorldView Legion satellites from the company Maxar Technologies. Built by one division of the company for the other, Maxar Space Systems manufacture the satellite. It'll be operated by Maxar Intelligence. T-minus 52 minutes, 13 seconds to the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Once again, we are facing the challenge of not being able to see the rocket in real time unless things happen to clear up in time for a liftoff. So hopefully we'll hear definitively from SpaceX that fueling has begun. Given that this is a customer mission, there is a decent possibility that we may get confirmation that fueling is either about to begin or is underway. Generally speaking, that'll happen at the T-minus 38 minute mark. We'll talk more about the timing of today's flight pre and post liftoff here in just a second. But as we're getting rolling, I want to thank the more than 1,500 of you who are joining with us live as we're getting our coverage started. If you haven't already, certainly appreciate it if you could do us a favor by clicking the like button and sharing the stream, allowing more folks to find their way into our live launch coverage as we continue on with the count. Also want to thank our moderators in the live chat for helping us out with today's coverage. Jeff Hansen, Callistia Lee joining us back once again after a early morning, and Rick Donner as well today. Appreciate the three of you. If you do see any of the other mods happen to cruise on in, actually, there I do see Rusty Shackelford also checking in right now. Any additional mods that might stop by, be sure to give them a big old Spaceflight Now hello. As always, these live launch opportunities are made possible by our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Jersey Jen, Joni Mahoney, James Fish, Cumulus Granatus, Astro Hunter, Ryan Snyder, Brandon Sawdargs, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability, when the viewing is better, to watch live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. It's just an illustration of how dense the fog is. We're, oh gosh, maybe 100 yards, if that, from our tracking camera here at the press site to the countdown clock. And you can just barely make it out right now. So it is quite dense this afternoon, cruising on into the evening. Very reminiscent of what we saw this morning here in Florida. It was now T-minus 49 minutes, 1 second and counting. For those who love hyperspecificity, we are 126 yards, according to Stephen. As we are just about 10 minutes away from the point at which SpaceX is preparing to give the call on the start of Propelload. Let's go through the countdown timeline. But before we do, just one last little bit of housekeeping. First off, want to welcome in new channel member Trey S., joining us with channel membership at the Power Leader level and then upgrading it to the Mission Specialist level. Appreciate that support, Trey. Thanks to Callisto Lee for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Callisto in the live chat, and we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Last little nugget for now. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other happenings in the realm of space and spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated. As I was teeing up, let's go ahead and talk about that countdown timeline. These are the milestones that we're expecting, with a smooth count towards a liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket coming up here at 6:13 p.m. Eastern. That said, if SpaceX is not ready to go and they have not started fueling their Falcon 9 rocket, they do have some latitude within this launch window today. Backup opportunities exist until 7:07 p.m. Eastern, 0007 UTC. And if, for whatever reason, none of the opportunities today pan out whatsoever, they do have another backup opportunity in a 24-hour turnaround scenario. That 60-minute window tomorrow opens up at 5:42 p.m. Eastern, 22:42 UTC. As I mentioned, the start of fueling begins with the go-ahead for that fueling process, which happens at, nominally speaking, the T-minus 38-minute mark. Once approved, tanking starts at T-minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, as well as liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, they begin loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the first stage as well. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes, the second stage RP-1 loading wraps up. And T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process begins. That's when SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. Normally, this is also a good visual indication that tanking is happening on time as expected. Here at pad 39A, we see it manifest visually with the so-called big vent right about T-minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds. Though I think we'll be hard-pressed to make out that vent from the fog once that does get underway. Nevertheless, that venting tapers off at about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up second stage LOX load to begin 30 seconds after that. T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, and it helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence get underway. Here at pad 39A, that's when the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, pulls back a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true on the second stage, about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 rocket will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as the call is made for the Falcon 9 being in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff at T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, coming up at 6:13 p.m. Eastern, 23:13 UTC. T-minus 42 minutes and 40 seconds. Time now, T-minus 40 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. Today's mission is the third pair of satellites in support of Maxar's WorldView Legion constellation. According to the company, with the deployment of these two satellites today into a mid-inclination Earth orbit, this will complete their Block 1 batch of satellites. As suggested by this mission patch from Maxar, the dark blue little crosses, the stars there, represent the first 4 WorldView Legion satellites that have been launched previously. The yellow 2 are for the ones yet to come that are currently on board the Falcon 9 that promise you is out there at Pad 39A, standing upright, ready to launch here in just about 40 minutes. Here's a view of what those satellites look like before they were encapsulated inside the payload fairings from SpaceX. These 2 made the trek from Maxar facilities out in Palo Alto, California, traveled across the country, arrived here in Florida in the early January timeframe, where they underwent final processing, including fueling, encapsulation, of course, and then brought out to the pad where they are now sitting atop the Falcon 9 rocket getting ready to lift off. Here's an artist rendering of what those satellites look like on orbit. And again, these satellites will join the current constellation of 4 other WorldView Legion satellites that are currently on orbit as we speak. This, of course, is a graphical representation, very much not to scale as far as the size of the satellites that you're seeing pictured on the screen, of course. Maxar says that once these satellites are on orbit and working in concert with the other 4 satellites in MEO, as well as 6 of its other satellites that are in orbit in a sun-synchronous orbit, they'll be able to revisit and image locations on Earth up to 15 times per day, tripling what it says is their 30 cm class collection capacity. Now T-minus 38 minutes and counting. At this point, generally speaking, this is when SpaceX will be making the call on the start of propellant load today, assuming that all is ready to move forward with this Falcon 9 rocket. Hopefully we'll be hearing word in the next minute or so, next couple of minutes perhaps, that tanking is about to begin on this Falcon 9 rocket. Now T-minus 34 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. At this point, assuming SpaceX is in a good position to start fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, tanking of the vehicle will have just begun. No word from SpaceX either way at this particular moment in time, though we are keeping our eyes peeled for any updates from them on the start of fueling. Normally, in the next minute or so, if we had a clearer view of the rocket, we could discern based off of the frost line beginning to form once the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the vehicle that tanking is underway. But as you can see, it's not very clear viewing of the Falcon vehicle today, although it does, and I'm going to sort of hedge my optimism here. It does appear in the last 10 or so minutes, things are starting to get a little bit clearer on the Falcon, or at pad 39A, seeing a little bit more definition with the countdown clock. So hopefully over the course of the next 33 minutes and some change, things will continue to improve. The fog will move past us here at the press site, and we'll actually be able to get some semi or genuinely decent views of the rocket prior to liftoff. No guarantees, of course. We don't have means to control the weather, but we will deal with the cards that we've been dealt. Speaking of the weather, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast pretty darn perfect conditions as far as liftoff constraints to launch the Falcon 9 rocket today. Greater than 95% chance of favorable launch conditions with today's Falcon 9 flight. No noted weather constraints. Taking a look at a satellite view over Florida and a little bit closer here to the Space Coast, and you can see some of the cloud and fog cover that we're dealing with. Fingers crossed that things will continue to improve. Time now T-minus 31 minutes, 31 seconds and counting. One last note on the weather. Even though things are good for a rocket launch, the meteorologist at the 45th Weather Squadron did note that visibility today would be pretty lousy, stating it would be somewhere in the realm of up to 7 miles or down to none. I think you can tell which end of that spectrum we are closer to at this point in time. Taking a look at our friend Chuck and Jen Briggs' perspective up in the Titusville area, looking back a little more south towards the pad. You can see those birds passing. There is some sunlight up a little farther north where they are, so there may be some hope that conditions will improve in time for liftoff. Again, don't want to raise false hopes, so we'll just continue to track conditions as we get closer to liftoff. Now T-minus 29 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. Less than 30 minutes to go with the current plan T0 on the Falcon 9 rocket. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button. It allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. If you haven't done so already, that'd be very much appreciated. As we're awaiting the launch of this rocket coming up here in a little less than 30 minutes, let's talk about where this Falcon 9 rocket is going to be flying once it lifts off from the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Haven't had this flight path in a minute or two. Once this Falcon 9 rocket ascends from Historic Launch Complex 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center, it will be flying in a northeasterly trajectory, the first stage booster performing that flip maneuver and returning for a touchdown at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So for our neighbors to the north in northeast Florida, in Georgia and the Carolinas, hopefully conditions are better where you are, and perhaps you'll be able to see the Falcon 9 rocket as it makes its flight. If you do happen to catch a glimpse of this rocket while it climbs uphill, you're able to capture it either with a still image or with video, we'd love to see what you're able to check out from your vantage point. Be sure to tag us on X or other social media. You can find us just by searching at Spaceflight Now. The Falcon 9 first stage booster that's supporting this mission will be flying for a fourth time today. Do have word finally from SpaceX confirming that propellant load has begun on its Falcon 9 rocket. That confirmation of fueling does mean that SpaceX is locked into its target T0 at 6:13 p.m. Eastern, 23:13 UTC. The booster on tap today, B1086, first flew as a Falcon Heavy side booster, making 2 more flights on Starlink missions, which we'll talk a little bit more about coming up here. But SpaceX is working to certify its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights, this being one of the newer in their fleet. Also working to certify their payload fairings for up to 40 missions apiece as well. The company saves about $6 million per recovery effort. They splash down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. So, assuming all goes well, SpaceX will endeavor to recover these fairing halves, bring them back into port. They'll be brought over to the Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center, examined, refurbished, and put back into service for a future mission. This is what it looks like when they are brought aboard the recovery vessel. This image taken from an earlier flight back in 2023. Time now T-minus 22 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. As we mentioned, this particular Falcon 9 first stage booster supporting today's mission B1086 is fairly young for a SpaceX booster compared to others that have flown in excess of 20 times at the Falcon 9 flight that we saw this morning on the Starlink 12-3 mission. Taking a brief tour through the history of this booster. Its first flight was back as a side booster on the GOES-U mission, lifting off on June 25th of 2024. It was followed by the launch of the Starlink 12-5 mission on December 8th, and then finally Starlink 12-11 on December 8th. Correction, that was actually January 8th on the Starlink 12-11 mission. Apologies for the typo. Time now T-minus 21 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. If conditions were a little bit better, I would say to keep your eyes peeled as we're approaching the start of the big vent here. Coming up now in just about 30 seconds as SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage LOX load. However, because the fog, I can't imagine that it will be discernible from our position here at the press site. Or for that matter, where Chuck is up in the Titusville area. It's just too densely foggy here right now, unfortunately, for that. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline for this mission. These are the nominal sequence of events that we're expecting with a good liftoff, booster landing, and satellite deployment coming up here today. Following a liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket coming up here in just about 20 minutes, Falcon 9 will pass through max Q with a point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle about 1 minute and 11 seconds into flight. A few events in fairly rapid succession come after that. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, about T plus 2 minutes and 13 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation. The first stage booster will perform a flip maneuver. The upper stage engine will ignite for the start of its first burn. The first stage boost back burn, which lasts just under a minute, will start at about the 2.5 minute mark. The payload fairings will be jettisoned a little bit after the 3 minute point in flight. Comparatively short first stage entry burn, about 18 seconds in total, beginning at T plus 6 minutes. One of those Merlin engines will come back to life for the start of the landing burn, about T plus 7 minutes and 15 seconds, with a planned touchdown at landing zone 1, about T plus 7 minutes and 46 seconds. It'll be interesting to see what the visibility of that flip maneuver and landing burn will be given the amount of fog, but we'll have our tracking cameras at the ready and do our level best to bring you the best possible views that we can, in combination with the cameras available from SpaceX as well. Moving along the launch timeline, the second stage engine will cut off just after the 8 minute mark. And we'll go into the first of a few coast phases here, with the engine coming back to life at T plus 43 minutes and 14 seconds for a brief 4-second burn, helping to put the upper stage on the right trajectory for the deployment of the first of the 2 satellites flying today, but the 5th overall WorldView Legion satellite, which will deploy at about T plus 47 minutes and 18 seconds. 2 more burns are on tap for the upper stage. After this, you've got one coming up at T plus 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 43 seconds. A quick 6-second burn on that. That'll be followed at T plus 1 hour, 42 minutes, and 48 seconds with a 5-second burn, setting up the deployment of the 6th WorldView Legion satellite at T plus 1 hour, 49 minutes, and 53 seconds in total. Time now T minus 17 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. At this point, we're about 30-ish seconds, about 40 seconds now away from the conclusion of the so-called big vent. Second stage lock zone on tap to begin here in 1 minute. Time now T minus 14 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Should be just a couple minutes away from getting some pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket courtesy of SpaceX. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank channel member Chuck Close for a generous $25 super chat. Really appreciate the support this afternoon / early evening, Chuck. Good to see you, as always. As we're getting ready to hopefully see some views from the pad level cameras of the Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and take a quick spin on the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX, Falcon 9 rocket, which stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. This particular booster, B-1086, has flown 3 times before, looking for flight number 4 today. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage back at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The top of the first stage is the inner stage. It's a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. On the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere tail first, like a big old dart heading towards LZ-1. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. In that first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and forwarding matic pushers ensure a clean separation. Second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired 4 times prior to the final deployment of the second Maxar WorldView Legion satellite. As with the first stage, so goes the second stage, burning that same prop mix of RP-1 and liquid oxygen. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, which are currently encapsulating the WorldView Legion satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material and stand 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 fairing halves will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage would normally land on a drone ship. Obviously, though, it's coming back for a land landing, so they'll be recovered several hundred kilometers out in the Atlantic Ocean. Time now, T-minus 9 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. As you can see from the pad level cameras, even SpaceX doesn't have great visibility on its Falcon 9 rocket today. It's just how dense the fog is. We can honestly barely see the countdown clock and the American flag here at the press site, about 126 yards away from where we are. Taking a look at a close-up view, though, you can see those payload fairings that are encapsulating the 2 Maxar satellites. As a quick bit of housekeeping, you note the countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen is hours based on real time. What you're seeing coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay. So assuming we can have some level of tracking capability with our cameras around the press site and here on the ground in Florida, we'll make those callouts based in real time. But once we pivot to the onboard cameras from SpaceX, we'll shift our callouts to what's coming in from the SpaceX timeline to align with those mission milestones. Now less than 8 minutes to liftoff. About a minute away from the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. Taking a look now at a view of landing zone 1 where the Falcon 9 first stage booster will return. As we saw with that brief glimpse from SpaceX, things are a little bit clearer at that part of Cape Canaveral. So hopefully at least the ground level cameras will be able to capture a good image of the booster landing. Hopefully our tracking cameras will be able to get something reasonably good as well. Engine chill is now currently underway. We're currently at T-minus 6 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. We're approaching the point at which the first stage RP1 load has wrapped up. Did hear the call out for that. Taking a look at the payload fairings now at the top of the rocket. According to SpaceX commentator, one of the fairing halves is flying for a 23rd time, the other for a 21st time. SpaceX doesn't often comment outside of customer flights how many missions its fairing halves have completed. Based off of what they've reported so far, a 23rd flight may be the flight leader for payload fairings. Taking a look right now at a promotional video from Maxar Technologies talking about the mission today. Taking a look at some graphical representation of the 4 satellites that have launched previously. Now T-minus 4 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Coming up here in now less than 10 seconds, the strong back should be pressurizing for its retract sequence. SpaceX confirms that no issues are being tracked. No issues on the rocket, that is. Spacecraft is also healthy. Weather remains clear for launch conditions. Now less than 4 minutes to go before liftoff. Now T-minus 3 minutes, 20 seconds and counting in real time. It's a little bit hard to make out through the fog, but you can see a little bit of movement of that transporter erector pulling away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Also taking a look at our live chat here, want to welcome in another one of our moderators, Aussie Space Girl, joining us as we're now past the 3-minute mark when first stage liquid oxygen load will have concluded. Just awaiting that call out from SpaceX as well.
Both the first and we're standing by for that confirmation on board stage 1.
Stage 1, LOX load complete.
Right.
Coming up on the conclusion of fueling here. As we're watching for the conclusion of fueling here, I want to thank a few more folks in the live chat here. Thanks to Well-Reasoned Superhawk for being a channel member with us for now 15 months, saying please hit the like button, y'all. Now less than 2 minutes to go to liftoff. Thanks to Lisa Lynch for a $5 super chat, saying hope it's a great launch. Did hear the call for stage 2 LOX load being complete. At this point, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. One last thank you for now to channel member and moderator Jeff Hansen for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that, Jeff. Now a minute and a half to liftoff. The call of ground gas closeouts. As we're now approaching the final minute of the count, we're going to keep our focus on the rocket here. Come back to the live chat on the other side of liftoff. Coming up here in just a few seconds, we should hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
At this point, we are standing by for go for launch from the SpaceX launch director coming up here in the next few seconds.
Launch director, go for launch.
And with that, we have confirmation that SpaceX is ready to go for its second Falcon 9 flight of the day, supporting the Maxar 3 mission. 15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We should have engine ignition. Should have liftoff. Standing by for some visual. Confirmation from SpaceX of liftoff. Falcon 9 now traveling faster than the speed of sound. We're coming up on a sequence of events in fairly rapid succession now that the rocket is passing through max Q. First stage main engine cutoff, or MECO. That'll be followed by stage separation. The first stage engine will perform a flip maneuver. Second stage engine will ignite. First stage boost back burn will begin at about 2.5 minutes into flight. Payload fairings will be deployed about 3 minutes after liftoff. Based off the SpaceX timeline, we're coming up on MECO here in now less than 10 seconds. Here you see MECO.
And back ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
Good confirmation of those sequence of events. Kind of a nifty shadow on the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Now 3 minutes into flight in real time. Payload fairings will have jettisoned now at this point in real time, waiting for those events from the onboard cameras in just a few seconds. There you see those payload fairings separate. You can see the WorldView Legion satellites there. SpaceX set to recover those fairing halves using their recovery vessel called Bob, named after former NASA astronaut Bob Behnken, one half of the duo that flew the Demo 2 mission back in May of 2020. Confirmation of the boost back shutdown. Coming up next is the first stage entry burn, which is set to begin at about T+6 minutes in real time. Seeing those hypersonic grid fins deploy from the Falcon 9 first stage. Again, that entry burn set to begin now in less than 2 minutes. Those pulses that you're seeing on the first stage booster, those are the cold gas thrusters, helping to adjust the attitude or the positioning of the first stage booster as it makes its way towards Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As a nice visual on the reorientation of the first stage booster, you can see its shadow moving almost like a clock handle going backwards. You can see they're jutting up from the center of the rocket from our position here on the camera. Now T plus 5 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. We're now just about 15 seconds away from the start of the entry burn beginning in real time. Still making those callouts since we do have our tracking camera hopefully training on the Falcon 9 first stage booster in hopes of capturing either the entry burn and or the landing burn. Again, it is still quite foggy here in Florida, so it's fairly difficult to get views of the first stage booster. The entry burn's now underway in real time. And there you see Pete Carson's got that entry burn. Conclusion of the entry burn. In real time, still seeing views from the SpaceX onboard cameras coming in on a slight delay. With the conclusion of the entry burn, we're now standing by for the start of the landing burn, which will begin in about 15 seconds in real time. Landing burn should be underway now. Landing burn should be beginning from the SpaceX onboard cameras here shortly.
We're hearing that sonic boom of
Stage
reentry.
1 landing leg deploy.
And a good confirmation of the landing of the Falcon 9 first stage. And an MVAC shutdown as well. This was once again, the fourth liftoff and landing of this first stage booster. Confirmation of nominal orbit insertion. Seeing good views of the upper stage now. You can see the plume just off the side of the engine nozzle. Really nice view of it here. Now a little more than 9.5 minutes into this flight. Once again, the Falcon 9 second stage entering into a coast phase at this point in time. That'll be the case until T plus 43 minutes and 14 seconds, when there will be a brief 4-second burn. That'll be followed by the deployment of the 5th Maxar WorldView Legion satellite at T plus 47 minutes and 18 seconds. Following that deployment, there will be a brief period of coasting before the next upper stage engine burn at T plus 1 hour, 7 minutes, 43 seconds. That burn lasting about 6 minutes in duration. 6 seconds in duration. Another coast phase followed by the fourth and final pre-deployment burn at T plus 1 hour, 42 minutes, 48 seconds. That burn lasting about 5 seconds in total. Setting up the sixth and final Block 1 WorldView Legion satellite to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 49 minutes, and 53 seconds. As we're in these long periods of coast, we'll be reducing our amount of commentary until we approach some of the more notable events, but we'll of course keep you apprised of any developments along the way, should there be any bumps that are occurred by SpaceX. Checking in periodically with updates on the process of this WorldView Legion mission. Now T plus 26 minutes, 28 seconds and counting based off of the SpaceX timeline of things. Had some really nice views of the Falcon 9 upper stage, including the 2 Maxar satellites for quite some time in this flight. Following along now with the telemetry data and seeing those tracking views. Watching the Falcon 9 pass over the Mediterranean Sea, heading towards Egypt at this moment, or just north of Libya, heading towards Egypt, and should cruise right over the Red Sea as well. Once again, the next milestone coming up on this mission is at T plus 43 minutes and 14 seconds, when there will be a brief 4-second burn of the upper stage engine, putting the Falcon 9 second stage on the right trajectory ahead of the deployment of the first of the 2 WorldView Legion satellites on this flight. In total for Maxar, this will be its 5th Block 1 WorldView Legion satellite to be deployed. Again, that's coming up at T plus 43 minutes and 14 seconds. For those who may just be checking in again, as we are in these long coast phases, we'll be pulling back on the amount of commentary, checking in periodically with pertinent updates, and as we get close to some of those milestones coming up. Good first stage booster landing, though, completing the 4th flight for Falcon 9 booster B1086, just before the 8-minute mark in flight. Now T plus 40 minutes, 7 seconds in real time, coming up on that 40-minute mark based on the SpaceX feed. Watching ongoing coverage of the Maxar 3 mission from SpaceX as they are preparing to deploy the first of 2 of Maxar's WorldView Legion satellites. The 5th so far in the Maxar constellation for its Block 1 version of these WorldView Legion Earth observation satellites. We're just about 3 minutes away now from the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage coming back to life for the start of its second burn, lasting about 4 seconds in duration. That'll set the satellite up for deployment at about T plus 47 minutes and 18 seconds. Time now T plus 42 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. SpaceX is conditioning the engine prior to its ignition. Let's go ahead and listen for those callouts as the burn begins and ends.
Right now is on board stage 2 of Falcon 9 and is capable of relight to deploy multiple payloads to multiple orbits on the same mission. And again, if you are just joining us today we are delivering 2 next-generation WorldView Legion satellites to orbit for our customer, Maxar Intelligence. Great views of SES-2 on your screen there, and we are expecting this burn to last about 20 seconds. Forgive me, 10 seconds.
Nominal orbit insertion.
There's confirmation from Mission Control that we've had nominal orbital insertion. SpaceX launched the first set of WorldView Legion satellites in May 2024 and the 3rd and 4th satellites in August 2024. Today's Maxar 3 mission will deliver the final 5th and 6th satellites to complete the first block of Maxar's next-generation WorldView Legion constellation. The 5th satellite will be the first to be deployed, and we're expecting that at T plus 46 minutes and 57 seconds. Our customer today, Maxar Intelligence, is a geospatial intelligence company that delivers geospatial information for consumer navigation, mission planning, disaster response, defense intelligence, and more. The Maxar Legion constellation supports national security, defense, and humanitarian response for the U.S. and allied governments. When complete with 4 satellites in mid-inclination orbit and 6 satellites in sun-synchronous orbit, Maxar will be able to revisit some locations on Earth up to 15 times per day with unprecedented imagery resolution. We are standing by expecting that payload deploy in just about 2 minutes, and of course getting great views of MVAC up in space as we await for that payload deploy signal from our onboard flight computer and confirmation from Mission Control. As always, you can also follow along with our Stage 2 telemetry in the bottom of your screen. And you can see right now we're holding in orbit, which we heard called out from Mission Control that we're in the right orbit for this deployment as we prepare for that deployment of the 5th WorldView Legion satellite. Just about a minute until we're expecting that payload deployment call from Mission Control. Getting really awesome views on the left-hand side of your screen there of the curvature of the Earth behind the MVAC engine skirt. As I mentioned earlier in the broadcast today, the MVAC engine skirt is one of the things that helps us to optimize the performance of this engine in the vacuum of space. MVAC, of course, is short for Merlin Vacuum Engine, which is the engine on board Stage 2. And it's quite similar to the 9 engines on board the booster of Falcon 9, which moved the rocket through the Earth's atmosphere prior to stage separation.
Maxar's 5th WorldView Legion spacecraft deployment confirmed.
So there we heard the call out, and you can see successful deployment of that 5th WorldView Legion satellite on your screen. The 2nd WorldView Legion satellite for today's mission will be deployed at about T+1 hour and 49 minutes. So with that, we'll take a short break and return for our 3rd relight of that MVAC engine on the
with a good deployment of that first satellite, number 5 for Maxar. As you just heard, it's the upper stage now going into another coast phase. Still tracking the telemetry of the upper stage. Want to go ahead and turn our attention, though, to another bit of imagery, this time coming from our photographer, Michael Kane, who happened to apparently have the best view of the Falcon 9 rocket from a little bit further away, closer to central Florida, near the Orlando area. This is a view of the boost back burn as the Falcon 9 first stage was making its way back towards touchdown at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, which of course we saw was successful for that first stage booster B-1086. Another image from Michael coming during the ascent of the full Falcon 9 stack, a really nice juxtaposition of the plane in the foreground, the rocket in the background, making its ascent from Historic Launch Complex 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. Again, if you're not following our photographers, Michael Kane, Adam Bernstein, you can follow them on their social channels. X, for instance, you can find Michael at MD Kane Jr. and Adam at ABurn NYC. Currently T plus 49 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. Time now T plus 55 minutes, 18 seconds and counting on the SpaceX feed. We're trending towards the third burn of the upper stage engine, coming at about T plus 1 hour, 7 minutes and 43 seconds per the SpaceX timeline that they published. As I mentioned, we're pulling back a little bit on the commentary given these long coast phases, but to not leave you with long stretches of silence, want to go ahead and bring in our own space tunes. And we'll be back with you with additional updates as there are relevant pieces of commentary, and be sure to bring you those burns as they happen. Watching Spaceflight Now live coverage of the Maxar 3 mission, the deployment of the WorldView Legion satellites 5 and 6.
game. It's a rich thing.
Now T plus 7 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. 1 hour, 7 minutes, now 10 seconds and counting. SpaceX is preparing for the third burn of its Merlin vacuum engine, which will last in roughly 10 seconds in total. Let's listen in for that call out for the burn.
Great views of SES-3 up there in space with the Earth behind our MVAC engine. And confirmation of shutdown. With that, we're about 35 minutes away from a fourth ignition of the MVAC engine on the second stage, which will carry the payload to the orbit needed to deploy
Nominal orbit insertion.
the spacecraft. And there's confirmation of nominal orbital insertion. Again, that second deployment is our second and final deployment of today's mission. We'll take another break here for our next coast phase, but we'll see you back in about 34 minutes.
Now T plus 1 hour, 8 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. As you just heard, a good nominal orbit insertion. And we are a little more than 30 minutes away from the fourth and final pre-deployment burn of the upper stage engine. So as we're entering into this latest coast phase, we're going to take a pause from commentary. We'll be back with you a little bit closer to that deployment or that burn point. Let you know about any relevant updates as they happen, if there's anything to report in the interim. But for now, we'll kick it on back to some space tunes, and we'll be back with some additional commentary ahead of SES-4. Now T plus 1 hour, 42 minutes, 16 seconds and counting on the SpaceX timeline of things. We're coming up on the fourth and final burn prior to the deployment of the sixth and final WorldView Legion Block 1 satellite. This burn lasting about 5 seconds in total. Let's go ahead and listen for that call out.
Right now we are standing by for second engine start 4 of our MVAC engine on board stage 2. Great views on your screen there of second engine start 4. And now, of course, we're standing by for a call out that we are in a
Nominal orbit insertion.
right on schedule, nominal orbit. With that confirmation of the fourth relight and correct orbital insertion for this MVAC engine burn, we're going to take one more break before the final satellite for today's mission is deployed. We'll see you back here in just about 5 minutes.
And with a good completion of that burn, we are too going to step back and continue to see these great views of the Falcon 9 second stage with now roughly 5 minutes to go before the deployment of the final satellite on today's mission. We'll be back with you with additional commentary when deployment is upon us. As we're getting ready for the deployment of the final satellite on today's mission, do want to thank a few folks for their time, attention, and support today. Thanks to Charles Baxter for a $10 super chat. Appreciate you, Charles. Says thanks, Spaceflight now. Thanks as well to Galaxy Blaze with a $2 super chat. Says, hi guys, hope you have a good day. And likewise, back at you. One of our wonderful channel members, Deb, with a $5 super chat. Thank you, Deb, who says, thanks guys, love the coverage. I retired from this kind of space stuff a couple of years ago. This makes my heart happy. And Nonsense McGee with a $5 super chat says, saw it bright and clear from Raleigh, North Carolina. And yeah, we saw on social media, folks had pretty good views all the way up to Maryland and well up along the eastern part of the United States. So glad there was good viewing outside of the immediate press site here. where we were pretty socked in with the fog. But always wonderful to hear that folks had good views of a launch. We're now at the top of the hour here, 8 p.m. on the Space Coast, 0100 UTC, just a couple minutes away from deployment of that satellite right there, the final of the Block 1 for Maxar's WorldView Legion constellation. Coming upon deployment of the Maxar satellite here. Should be now in less than a minute.
Maxar's 6th WorldView Legion spacecraft is now deployed.
With that confirmation and great visual, you can see the second successful deployment of this mission today.
And with a good deployment of the second and final satellite on behalf of Maxar Technologies, we'll go ahead and stay with these views of the satellite. Well, now that they've toggled back away from that, unfortunately. We'll continue to keep an eye on this. Oh, there we go. Back to the right side. Go ahead and pivot to our mission stats as they currently stand. Once we no longer have views of the spacecraft drifting away from the Falcon 9 upper stage. This mission marked the fourth flight of Falcon 9 booster 1086. This was the 433rd Falcon 9 launch to date, the 16th Falcon 9 launch of 2025. This was the 377th Falcon booster reflight, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. With no Falcon Heavies on the schedule yet, this was also the 16th orbital launch for SpaceX of the year, the 140th orbital launch for the company within the last 365 days. This was the 103rd orbital launch from Pad 39A for SpaceX, and the 197th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Here's a bar chart of where things currently stand for SpaceX from years past through the present. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 48th booster landing at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That marked the 59th booster landing here in the Sunshine State, the 82nd SpaceX land landing when you factor in those touchdowns at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. And this was the 405th overall successful booster landing for SpaceX to date. Finally, with some industry stats across the world, this was the 12th orbital flight from Florida so far this year, the 17th orbital launch from U.S. soil, 17th launch from a U.S. rocket company, and the 25th orbital launch attempt from around the world. So far, all of them have brought their payloads to their intended orbit. Here's where the pie chart currently stands. The U.S. with those 17 launches holding about 68% of the pie. China with its 6, about a quarter of the pie. India and Japan with 1 launch apiece. And with that, my friends, that'll go ahead and do it for our coverage of the WorldView Legion 5 and 6 mission. Appreciate all of you for hanging with us through to the very final moments of deployment. I want to thank our friends P. Carsons with Max Q Productions, Chuck and Jen Briggs for doing their level best to try to track the Falcon 9 rocket, managing to snag it every now and again, though quite difficult given the fog. Next mission coming up should be on Friday afternoon, the Starlink 12-9 mission coming right in the middle of the afternoon. So hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, fog shouldn't be an issue then. I want to thank our moderators in the live chat. Thanks to Clistia Lee, Rick Donner, Jeff Hansen, Aussie Space Girl, and all of our other mods for helping out today. Thanks to channel member Cumulus Granatus for answering a number of questions throughout a very long coast phase in the live chat as well. Big thanks to our photography team of Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane for helping to provide visual support for this Falcon 9 flight. Thanks to our editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.